The Global Energy and Utilities Group of PricewaterhouseCoopers is the corporate underwriting sponsor for Energy, Environment, and Economics, the second in a series on global energy and policies it will take to ensure adequate future energy supplies.
Energy Houston. Energy Houston Magazine, an unedited forum from business and government leaders. Energy Houston Magazine.
Across the globe, many big cities have ozone levels so dangerous that small children, the sick, and elderly are advised to stay indoors. Evidence is mounting that the Earth's atmosphere may be heating up, causing melting glaciers, increased insect pests, and changes in growing patterns. Clearly, the environment needs our attention. At the same time, however, our economy, which runs on abundant supplies of low-cost energy, is also suffering. Gasoline prices over $2 a gallon are not acceptable. We won't tolerate increases of 50, 40, or even 30% in our electricity or gas bills, but increasingly we must look to foreign producers for the energy supplies we need. Massive amounts of capital need to be spent on our own infrastructure, and domestic production needs to be increased. America's leadership has warned that a crisis is looming. The President has presented a national energy policy, and Congress is now finalizing the first new energy legislation in a decade, but much still needs to be debated. Can the balance between the environment and the economy be maintained? World Energy Television presents a 60-minute roundtable discussion featuring top figures in the energy industry, along with policymakers and environmental experts. Energy, environment, and the economy asks the hard questions and gets honest answers from the people who know. Don't miss this revealing look at the energy industry from the inside. Noted environmental architect and designer William McDonough appears with Nuclear Energy Institute President Joe Colvin, Gary Evans, President of Magnum Hunter, and Capstone Turbine President Dr. Åke Almgren.
World Energy Television presents this special on Energy, Environment, and Economics. One of the main points of contention in current debate is how we can protect the environment and our economy as well, with plentiful supplies of inexpensive energy. Please join us for Energy, Environment, and Economics.
Hello, I'm Doug Johnson, Associate Publisher of World Energy Magazine. Thank you for joining us for the second of 4 Energy Roundtable programs produced by World Energy Television. In our first program, Meaningful Energy Policy, Is It Possible?, we focused on the House and Senate energy bills that are now in conference, hopefully to produce a bill before year's end. Today's program, Energy, Environment, and the Economy, has been designed to take the debate over energy policy to another level. Americans want to continue to enjoy plentiful supplies of low-cost energy. But can we do it? Can we protect our environment while we do it? And can it be done in a timely enough basis to maintain the momentum and our public support? Our panel today includes Dr. Åke Almgren, President and CEO of Capstone Turbine Corporation, a public company currently trading on the NASDAQ under CPST, and is the leader in ultra-low emission, high-reliability microturbine systems. Representing the nuclear energy industry, we have Mr. Joe Colvin, President and CEO of the Nuclear Energy Institute, Mr. Gary Evans, President of Magnum Hunter Resources, currently trades on the New York Stock Exchange under MHR, and finally, Mr. Bill McDonough joins us, Time Magazine's Hero for the Planet 1999. He is the chairman of the China-U.S. Center for Sustainable Development and a professor of architecture at the University of Virginia. Let's begin with energy policy. Our national leaders, including the President and both houses of Congress, have said America has to change its approach to the production and use of energy. Joe, I'd like to start with you. Do you agree?
Absolutely. I think that what we have seen through this national energy policy is really a recognition that we need all the energy sources we have on the production side, along with efforts to conserve and improve the efficiencies of our electricity supply sector and how the public uses electricity.
Okay, what are the key changes as you see it?
As you said, I think the key word is efficiency in terms of energy supply and also efficiency in energy use. But in order to tie those two things together, we need to make the market work. And I think the key word there is to get more price transparency so we can provide the supply and provide the demand in a good mix.
I see. Gary, what about oil and gas? Does anything need to change there?
One of the major areas they're trying to change with respect to our current policy is opening up some frontier areas such as the Arctic. And the United States, we're producing everything we can possibly produce to meet our current energy needs, and we do need some frontier areas, some other deep water plays. We've obviously been cut out of California, and we need to open up every area we can to meet the needs of our country.
Bill, I know you have some strong opinions here. First, do you agree? Then please share your opinion.
Well, I would certainly agree. I think that if we look at our national energy policy such as it is, it's really not a plan. It's what I would call a de facto plan. It's the thing that's happening because we have no plan. And that when you look at the tragedies that we see potentially in the world, and whether you want to focus on the science from one angle or another, the fact of the matter is we have grave concerns over particulates, over acid rain, over the potential for climate change and global warming and so on. And these tragedies that are out there in the world are of our making, and that we can't really ignore them or say that they're not part of our plan, because at this point they're part of our de facto plan. So if our culture has become strategically tragic, it begs a question, because I think any commercial actor, certainly when they see that they've become strategically tragic and have adopted a strategy of tragedy, realize it's time for a strategy of change. And that means we have to be humble and really start to explore what that change would look like, because we don't necessarily know what to do. We just know that we want to do something other than we've been doing, because what we're doing has these tragic consequences.
Gary, one popular area of change that everyone is talking about is consumption. Let's talk about conservation. Can America conserve its way out of a future energy shortage?
There's no way. We are already doing everything we can from technology and other areas of our business to try to conserve energy. And it's funny how when prices move to a certain level, conservation automatically kicks in. There is a natural equilibrium of where prices can be and should be and where conservation kicks in. But over the next 20 years, our energy consumption here in the United States is going to go up 50%. And we've got to use every single source of energy supply, whether it be coal, nuclear, hydro, natural gas, oil, and wind power, biomass, you name it. We've got to have it all. And conservation will help. It obviously has helped over the past 20 years, but it's not going to be the only source.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, conservation is crucial. I think it's extremely important, but it will not bail us out of the challenge. And I would like to point to the fact that after the oil crisis, 1973, 77, all these energy conservation initiatives have paid off quite a lot. If we would have done all these things, we would have a huge, huge crisis well before we are where we are today. And they will be very important going forward, but they will not be enough.
Joe, what's your opinion on this?
You know, one of the things, if we talk about conservation, we talk about electricity, what we really need to do is look at if we just take a simple growth rate in electricity over the next 20 years, the Department of Energy says we need to, if we grow electricity rates in the United States at about 1.8 to 2%, we're going to need about 400,000 megawatts of new generation of electricity within the next 20 years. That's to account for both the growth in demand and aging plants that will be ultimately shut down. If you just put that in perspective, that's about half again as much as our total electricity grid in the United States today. And conservation in the electricity and renewable sources in there really provide just a few percent of that growth. So we're looking at trying to put that on a scale of 2 or 3 to 5% improvements in conservation and efficiency. And with the need that we have to grow, we have to increase the electricity demand by about 50%.
America has solved many problems with better technology. What new developments offer the most hope for improving our energy situation?
There are several in all these technology areas, conventional technologies as well as new technologies. I'd like to highlight a couple of areas. One, I think, is evolutionary. It's maybe not as glamorous, but I think the workhorse in many of the energy industry is reciprocating engines. And I think one of the key things there to make them even more efficient, more clean, that's a very important development. By the company I represent, the new technologies, microturbines, I think that's an area which is very promising. I think we've been leading the way in that field. Photovoltaics is another area which I think will continue to improve and come down in cost. But there are two other areas which I think are very important further. One is energy storage. every progress on battery technologies, ultracapacitors, will help also the communication. And I come back to this about price transparency. And for that we need communication, two-way communication between supply and demand.
Mm-hmm. Joe, where do you stand on this?
Well, you know, in the United States, we really have a great opportunity in every industry, because I think technology is the issue that is going to help the U.S. maintain its advantage in competing on a global marketplace. In the nuclear sector, what we're seeing is tremendous improvements and opportunities in building new types of reactors that take advantage of different fuel mixes, that take advantage of efficiencies that we can't get out of some of the current plants. We have a new concept that we're talking about in the Generation 4 reactors, which would look at new types of modular gas-cooled reactors, a new type design called the pebble bed modular reactor, other types of gas-cooled technologies that in the past have not been brought into commercial operation in the United States, and have been brought into commercial operation effectively within the rest of the world. But today we have the opportunity to look at those in a different way and really expand on the technology base that the United States have, and in fact bring those reactors to help support the electricity supply in the United States, and perhaps even in other countries by marketing those outside the U.S.
The House and Senate are currently debating a compromise on the energy bill committee. One of the sticking points is opening the Alaskan wilderness to more oil and gas exploration and development. Gary, do you think the Senate will be able to keep that from happening? If they do, how will that impact your business? And what do you think the American people want?
I don't believe it's going to pass. I don't believe I think the Senate is not going to allow that to happen, unfortunately. There may be some small areas they open up, but what's the result's going to be? We're going to pay higher. The American people are going to pay higher prices. I mean, you can't have your cake and eat it too. We need that frontier area to have more oil and gas production available for our consumption here in the U.S. If it's going to be closed, then you're going to pay a higher price because we only have a limited supply. So I don't think it will pass this time.
Aki, what's your opinion, and what do the American people want?
Ultimately, I think what people want is inexpensive, reliable energy. And they also would like it clean. But if you have to make a choice, I think to just get the energy will override the environmental aspects.
That's policy. Let's discuss the environment now. Although science has not confirmed that man-made emissions are causing global warming, some energy giants, including BP, Amoco, and Shell, are already cutting their CO2 emissions, presumably without economic sacrifice. Is cleaner air possible without dampening our economy? Joe?
I think the answer is absolutely yes. What we need to do is figure out ways to, in fact, reduce CO2 or eliminate CO2, as well as other types of pollutants in the environment through the increases in technology and through the increases in uses of sources of electricity and automobiles and other things that, in fact, do not emit pollutants to the environment. Clearly, nuclear energy is an important part of that strategy. We provide today 20% of our nation's energy in the United States in electricity that it's emission-free. There are no pollutants of sulfur dioxides, nitrous oxides, mercury, other types of particulates, or in the case of global climate change, carbon or carbon dioxide. The unfortunate part at this point is that our policies that we have in our nation do not recognize the reliance on avoiding technologies like nuclear energy or like renewables that in fact avoid the emissions of pollutants in the first place. And we need a fundamental and basic change in that. But it's possible. It's possible in the U.S. and it's possible in the world. But we just need to put forth the efforts in the administrative sides to in fact make those realities, and then try to ensure that a ton of a pollutant that is reduced is the equivalent to a ton of pollutant that's avoided. And if we do that, I think we can move forward.
Any comments, Bill?
Well, it's very clear that these companies, certainly public companies that are doing CO2 emissions, are going to be doing it in a way that's cost effective. Otherwise, I can assure you, they probably wouldn't be so excited about it. But the real issue, I think, as we look forward as a culture, is to imagine what the future really wants to look like. And for most environmentalists, when we see what's now being called the triple bottom line, where businesses are being asked to look at both their social effects and their ecological effects as well as their economic viability. That what we see is that a lot of people are looking at their social benefits by saying, well, we've created some daycare centers or we're providing some jobs as societal benefits, and that they're getting better about that. You know, they're paying living wages, they're taking care of their workers and so on, which is nice. But when we see the environment, what they do is they look at the environment and record their environmental bottom line by talking about how they've been less bad. They'll say, I've reduced my CO2 emissions by 10%, or I've reduced my toxification, my persistent toxic releases by 20% or something like that. And that's all very nice, except is being less bad being good? Or is it simply being bad, just less so? So I think the exciting thing for me is to have these companies engaging in a positive agenda, and we're starting to talk about what percentage are we solar powered and things like that. That's a much more interesting dialogue, I think, for our long-term future, because it represents a strategy that isn't just simply saying, I accept the way we are today being bad and I'll try and be less bad. I think that's, from a cultural perspective, it's not optimized.
So it's not optimized. What do you gentlemen think about the triple bottom line?
I have, coming back to the previous question, can clean air, more energy efficient, go hand in hand with a better environment? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. And I would like to point one example in the transportation sector. Our company and others have been involved in hybrid electric vehicles. And what we measure there is that we can reduce the energy consumption by 50% or 1/3. And at the same time cut emissions to, in some cases, down to 1/10. I think what the Japanese are doing now with the Toyota Prius, the Honda Insight, the Civic, it's interesting. That's not selling primarily because it's cleaner, it's much cleaner, but it's selling because it's much better economy. And I think that's a good example where these things can go hand in hand.
How about the triple bottom line in the oil and gas sector, Gary?
I think Joe's kind of preaching to the choir. I mean, our business, we're consumers of energy just as we produce energy. And we're constantly looking for ways to improve our bottom line. And one of those ways is by having other sources of energy than burning our natural gas. For instance, we're right now in our company looking at putting in compressors that have the ability to burn either natural gas or electricity depending upon the spark spread. So we can, through the internet, turn that compressor on to natural gas, or we can turn it on to electricity. We're also looking at putting in turbines, wind turbines, out on some of our platforms in the Gulf of Mexico to generate electricity so we don't burn our own natural gas. So our industry is probably on the forefront of looking at ways that we can maximize our energy dollar. Every molecule of natural gas that we produce, we want to get that to the end user. And if it means using renewable sources of energy to produce that, we'll do it. And it's being done throughout our industry.
Global warming aside, many major U.S. cities are plagued with smog so bad that on some days, children and the elderly must stay inside. It's believed that motor vehicles are responsible for a majority of this pollution. Can it be stopped or mitigated?
It can be stopped, it can be mitigated, it can't be eliminated. I think, in fact, here we have a success story because United States, with California in the lead, is leading the way worldwide with the toxic gases, the NOx and the bad stuff.
Right.
And the emission standards, I think, have taken gradual steps, have been a significant improvement. And it continues now looking at the reduction of the diesel urban fleet vehicles and other means to cut it down further. And in this area, I think U.S. has set a very good standard. And it strikes me when traveling internationally that, for example, Europe is very, very focused on the global warming, but are very, very lax or take it very easy on the NOx. And I think in that case, I think we are a good benchmark.
Joe, can it be stopped or mitigated?
I think the answer is yes. In fact, I just came from a meeting a week ago talking to people in the fuel cell technology area. And I think there are great breakthroughs in technology that can be made in the near future and will be made in the near future. In particular, I think the largest source, from my understanding, the largest source of pollutants in California, for example, comes from large trucks and vehicles on the highway, not passenger cars, but about 2/3 of the pollutants from mobile sources that occur in a state like California are from large trucks. And there are some efforts underway to, in fact, try to look at making the fuel cell vehicles, making fuel cells available for large vehicles such as trucks and buses and things of that nature. It could be brought into play over the next decade or more and make a substantial reduction on the types of air pollutions and pollutants that are being put into the environment.
Well, to what extent can green power such as wind, biomass, hydrogen, solar, and hydropower reduce our dependency on fossil fuels?
Well, I think we have to move forward with exploring those technologies and, in fact, increasing their use. But there are only limited ways that those technologies can help. I mean, the sun only shines half the day or less. The wind only blows part of the time. So what we need to do is to supplement the types of our electricity sector with those types of powers in areas where we can, in fact, rely on those to a greater degree. And if you look at the parts of the United States, if I take Alaska, for example, from where I just came, Alaska has winds a lot of the time. The question is, can Alaska use the wind technology and use that effectively or not? And the question is, will there be investment in there? And those are being looked at. The reality is, though, we still need the types of fundamental fossil fuels to form the baseload of and the backbone or foundation of our nation's electricity supply sector.
Bill, what's your position on this matter?
Well, I think we have to just look transparently at the existing costs, and it doesn't mean that we have to ask our companies to really take in the externalities, so-called, onto their ledgers and then drive them out of business. I think we have to develop an optimized economic strategy for the transition. And I think as soon as we recognize that once renewables get to the scale that our present economically driven energy systems have reached, that they will be hugely competitive. If we run the numbers out, it's really exciting to watch when you really do the whole systems analysis. As long as you're working within an existing system that has capitalized and fully amortized infrastructure, it's very hard for the new player on the block. But as soon as you start to imagine the scale that we could be working at with the new protocols for renewables, it's very easy to imagine us moving into a sort of delightful prospect of renewable energy quite quickly.
Let's move on to transportation fuels. Oil supplies about 40% of our total energy diet and almost all of our transportation fuel requirements. Yet our dependency on foreign crude continues to rise, along with our appetite for gasoline. Better gasoline mileage from vehicles is only part of the answer. Can we expect more U.S. crude production?
The United States is on a natural decline of oil and gas production, predominantly oil in the lower 48. The only new source of supply has been the deep water plays that really begun over the last 5 years, but they don't even come close to meeting the demand needs of our country. So the answer to the question is we don't have the supply in the United States for crude oil. We will have to depend on foreign supplies to meet our energy thirst and desire to have gasoline, and that which is predominantly comes from crude oil. So the answer is we are not going to get out of the trap we're in.
And I think what Gary says, I mean, the number I have in my head is like 65% of the oil we are importing. Most of that goes for the vehicles. So I think if we can't find more oil here, and we don't like to explore more oil, I mean, we have to be more energy efficient in the cars. I mean, it's a given. And I think like the study which MIT presented last year, the hybrid electric vehicles again, I think is one technology which is available today to make a significant impact, and nothing we have to wait for. It can be done now, and I think the Japanese are leading the way here.
What about alternative transportation fuels, such as ethanol, biodiesel, or hydrogen?
It's very similar to the green energy, renewable energy is important. They will require support in order to grow, and I think it's important we continue to grow those. For vehicle, as I can see it, it will have a marginal effect. It's good whenever we can use it, and I'm very positive about it. But it can't replace the gasoline or diesel in a quick way.
Yeah, and is it going to power my 4-barrel carburetor in my Corvette? Let's move to electricity. Coal is America's most abundant energy resource, supplying half of our power generation fuel needs. Is clean coal a possibility, and do we really need to spend $2 billion in tax on its development? Bill?
We're looking at some technologies now in coal that are pretty interesting. We're looking at them for China. I am the chairman of the China-U.S. Center for Sustainable Development. I'm the U.S. chair. And so we're studying various different kinds of coal-burning technologies that are very interesting to us as a strategy of actually being able to work with the carbon and with the temperatures that become highly propitious. So I think we're actually developing those without the need for this massive research funds. I'd rather see $2 billion be optimized around renewables. If one had $2 billion to spend on clean energy, the question would be, should we spend it on coal? Perhaps. I think that's worth debate. But I also think that we could benchmark some of the new technologies we're seeing on coal that can allow coal to be part of this transition to a solar world, but perhaps speed up the transition by actually putting $2 billion into wind, for example, and how we array it in the landscape in a way that the culture would be delighted with. I think the big worry about wind is that a lot of people, are worried about what they're going to look like and where they're going to go. And that's a legitimate concern. As an architect and community designer, I'm quite concerned about how things look in the landscape. But I think we can do an optimization of where the wind goes, where we'd love to see it, like on the Great Plains, our great OPEC of wind out there, out at sea in the center of the Great Lakes and things like that. There are plenty of places for us to array these things, and the $2 billion would go a long way to helping us optimize them in the landscape as well as jumpstart what potentially could be a $1 trillion industry.
Oki, what do you think?
Yeah, this is one of the big challenges. The fact is that coal is an important energy. Still, it is one of the toughest to make clean. And it's abundant in the U.S. We have it in China, India. It's a base energy source. I can't have any clear opinion whether $2 billion is the right way to spend it. I tend to share the view as Bill expressed. If you have a choice, I probably would spend it differently, more on renewables. On the coal, my opinion is that probably the best way to do it clean is to gasify it. And there are development there, and I think that has to continue. But to burn coal in the way it's being burned today, I think that's very, very negative.
Comments, Gary?
Why should one form of energy resource get a preferential treatment? $2 billion is a lot of money that can be spread over every segment of our industry. Whether it's oil and gas, whether it's nuclear, whether it's solar, why should one energy source get that preferential treatment? I think those monies, if they're going to be spent, should be spread. It's going to take all segments of our business to meet our energy demands, and so let's don't give priority to one source.
What about nuclear? Can it move past contributing 20% of our power generation?
The percentage of nuclear generation really depends upon how much electricity is generated or used in the United States. For example, if you looked at nuclear from a standpoint of how much capacity it has, it really only represents about 15% of the installed capacity in electricity generation in the United States, and yet it's producing 20 to 21% of the electricity that's actually generated, used, and consumed in the United States. So it is a moving target, but what we're really looking at is to try to allow nuclear to be a viable source of new generation in the United States through expanding the types of technologies that are available and, in fact, reducing the capital costs of those technologies. The real issue, whether we're talking about nuclear energy, we're talking about any large capital-intensive projects, is how do you provide a sufficient return on the investment that's made, whether it's a company's own investment or whether the public invests in those projects, to get the type of return that you need over the period that's sufficient enough to cause people to invest. And it's true whether you're building refineries or nuclear plants. Large capital-intensive projects takes years to recover or amortize that initial capital investment. So while a nuclear plant has a large capital cost, it has a marginal cost of production of electricity that is, in fact, several times lower than natural gas. The question is, how do we match the short-term needs and with the long-term types of generation that we have? And so, in answer to your question, I think our sense is to try to keep nuclear in pace with the growing amounts of electricity that are needed, and even if we expand it by half again the size of the generating capacity that we have today, in the next decade, we will still only be at about 25% of the total generation. And that's assuming a very strong increase in renewable supply, a slight decrease in the hydro generation, over time, and a growth in the both electricity generated from coal and natural gas.
That's very interesting, Joe. What about these Generation 4 reactors I've been hearing about?
Well, I think our whole intent in the Generation 4 reactor side is to really accomplish two tasks. One is to increase the safety of the operation from those facilities, and two is to reduce the overnight capital costs, the embedded capital costs that you have to put in those plants. So if I take, for example, the technology that we're looking at, we're really looking at trying to get a technology that comes in from a capital cost about the same price as we would from clean coal or other large types of renewable electricity. Today, a nuclear plant, if we can bring it in, we're looking at a target of about $1,000 per kilowatt of installed electricity. Combined cycle gas generation is at about $700 to $800 per kilowatt. Clean coal is probably going to be about $1,100 per kilowatt. And we need to be competitive from that standpoint, and we think we can meet those targets. It's going to be the whole issue in Generation 4 and on the other reactors is, in fact, to make the plants operate more efficiently, generate higher amounts of power for the power from the standpoint of the density and output of the plant, and do so in many ways building modular types of designs that can be expanded to meet the local needs and the grid capacity that exists or demands that exist within a given area. So we're trying to kind of match up a lot of various parameters and provide the types of technologies that can best fit into each of those different situations.
When we're talking about capital investment and return on investment, are we taking into consideration the operational costs and security costs associated with the Yucca Mountain?
Today, it's interesting that you asked that question. In today's nuclear power plants, we pay for the cost of Yucca Mountain today. We pay a tenth of a cent per kilowatt hour of electricity generated. We've been giving the government that money for the last couple decades, and we're really pleased that the administration and the Congress has moved forward with the licensing or toward the licensing of Yucca Mountain facility. But from a nuclear economics perspective, in fact, nuclear pays for all the costs, all the costs of the operations, maintenance of the plant, the decommissioning and return of the plant at the end of its life to greenfield, along with the waste disposal costs and the costs of government regulation, are all costs that are embedded within the cost of 1 kilowatt hour of electricity from nuclear plants. And as they say, the proverbial level playing field is not level in this area, because nuclear pays for that in total, and that's not the same with other types of generation.
I didn't know that about Yucca Mountain. What else is out there that isn't common knowledge in your opinion?
This year, about a month ago, the United States Congress made the decision to override the veto of the state of Nevada and move forward with the licensing process for the Yucca Mountain repository. And on the face of it, that was really an issue that looked like it was solely focused on Yucca Mountain. But if you take a step back, what we really saw was a strong bipartisan support by a large majority of both the House and Senate to, in fact, a support for nuclear energy in the United States and support for the President's energy policy that looks at nuclear as a major component of our nation's energy policy and our energy security for the future. And we have also moved forward with solving a very pressing environmental issue, and that's how do we responsibly deal with the waste byproducts of nuclear technology, and how do we protect that from the environment for generations to come. Some people, the state of Nevada and some politicians would say, leave it where it's at and we'll figure it out in the future. And in my view, that's really an irresponsible approach. And thank goodness the Congress and the President also saw it as irresponsible from the standpoint we need to not burden our future generations with products and toxicity of materials and environmental issues that in fact we create. We have a responsibility in our generation to deal with these issues in the best way possible. And in fact, that's what we are doing with the Yucca Mountain repository. We're generating electricity from nuclear, we're generating in an environmentally friendly way, and at the same time we're in fact isolating that waste byproduct, a small amount. We're talking about the The total amount of waste byproduct from all the nuclear power plants in the U.S. over a 40-year life will fit on a football field about 40 feet deep. We're not talking about a large volume of waste, but what we're talking about is ways to, in fact, isolate that from the environment and protect the public for generations. I think that's a major step forward that our nation has taken, and it's viewed that way in the world. The U.S. is the leader, has been the leader in this technology. The rest of the world has been looking to the U.S. for leadership in how we solve these important environmental issues, and I think that's it's a great day for our nation and for the world in protecting the environment for the future.
Wind shows promise, but we'd have to dot the country with windmills, wouldn't we?
Yes. Wind is one of these technologies which have dark green renewable energy, has, thanks to significant government support in Europe, been growing, and we talk now in gigawatt numbers of wind. But one of the reasons wind has become more economical has been also technology improvement and going larger in size. When you go large in size, you don't want to have it in your backyard. So what's happening is that it's moving out. And in Europe, for example, they want to move the wind beyond the horizon. And when you move it beyond the horizon, then it becomes remote energy. And then you have new challenges how to bring that energy to where the consumption is.
Right, right. Gary?
Well, you've got to also put things in perspective with the size of the wind energy in the United States. It's less than 1% of our energy supply. So I think the technology, as Aki said, is definitely improved. Europe has been the forefront of that new technology. We're bringing it here in the United States, and if you go to West Texas, you'll see windmills dotted all over the landscape in areas, though, where there's not much population. And so it makes a lot of sense. But you've also got to put windmills in areas where there's wind. And there's only certain parts of the country that are conducive for generating wind power. And we've looked at putting wind power, as I said earlier, on platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. Unfortunately, the wind doesn't blow sufficiently to make that wind power work. It works in the North Sea, and it works off on the West Coast in California. So while it's a great source, renewable source, I would love to have a wind power mill in my backyard. I don't think my neighbors are going to accept it. As I said earlier, West Texas are dotted. The deer and antelope and rattlesnakes could care less, so you're going to have to go to rural areas to have it.
Right. Hopefully it won't impact our white wing season here in Texas.
As long as those windmills aren't going too fast to hit them.
Right. Bill, what's your position on this?
Well, you could add up the megawatts, and it'll be a lot. I mean, in the millions. And I think that's pretty exciting, actually. If you go out to the Great Plains and look at the Buffalo Ridge, the idea that we could distribute windmills across the landscape to our farmers on these industrial scale landscapes is pretty interesting. I'm not proposing we put them all over Cape Cod. I'm not proposing we'd run them down through Virginia, and so on and so forth. I think these are really fundamental questions about where they would be. They should be where the wind is, and they should be where society decides that they're beautiful instead of untoward. But if you look at the resource, it's certainly out there, and I think it's a national strategy. I have some other thoughts of where they can go that would be quite beautiful too. So I don't think the real estate's the issue. I think we have places at sea. That's what we're seeing. Ireland is proposing to put them off Dublin. I think that's about I forget how many miles out. Something like 10 miles out on a shoal. There are plenty of places to do an optimization strategy of where we want these things. We could do the same thing with solar. Solar is already economical in many places. And if we look at the solar flux and very high solar flux in Saudi Arabia, for example, or Arizona. San Diego right now is seeing a huge explosion of solar because of the economics. They're right there. It's time of day pricing will drive that because the solar is directly connected to the peak loads of air conditioning. It happens only with an hour off phase, so it's an ideal application where you have time of day pricing. So we could actually start mapping globally where solar is going to make sense and when, and so we can anticipate it. It's what we call anticipatory design science. It's what the military calls over-the-horizon targeting. But look out there and say, okay, at what point is this stuff economical, and how can we accelerate that when it's profitable for us to do so?
Our power grid has a lot of problems. How realistic is Secretary Abraham's vision of distributed generation as a solution?
I think it's very realistic, and I've been enthusiastic about it. The transmission distribution system needs a fix, and it's being debated a lot how to do the fix. And I think it will be a combination of actions. One, the transmission has to be extended. Some of that will be challenging because of, again, not in my backyard.
Right.
It's difficult to pull more wires and more cables. But I think there are technologies to use the wires more efficient, DC technologies. I think in high density areas, superconductivity can be used. But that's not enough. And I think distributed generation comes in and is available now and can be a good supplement to the grid. And in fact, on a cost basis, we take the grid for granted, but it costs about $600 at the lowest, or could be up to $1,300 per kW to build that grid. And if you could do distributed generation at $1,000 per kW, then in addition get the generation, which is another $600 including that, that's very, very good economics. And then the fact is can deployed where the power is needed. So I think it's an excellent supplement to the grid.
Joe, what's your position on this?
Well, I think distributed generation clearly has an important role to play in the future of our nation. The question is, what is the technology? How does it come into play? How is it connected into the electricity supply? How do you maintain the reliability of the distributed generation so that if I have a distributed generation at my home or business and it fails to operate, do I have a backup source of electricity, or am I out of service until I either replace it or repair it? I think that there are some very important questions that need to be looked at. I've had a recent briefing from the automobile industry, and there's discussion about fuel cell vehicles that in fact could be brought back to your home and at night tapped in and used to provide sources of electricity and feed it back into the grid. I think there's some very, very interesting approaches that are being looked at and alternatives to this that will fit into this. But I don't see those on the horizon within the next decade. I see those over the horizon within the next 2 to 3 decades. I think there's some real chance that we can, in fact, move to distributed generation in a way that it can provide both cost-effective power and also help reduce the emissions.
I disagree with you, especially when it comes to time horizon. Distributed generation is something which is available now. And in Japan, the last 4 years, we saw distributed generation grow by 18%, while centralized power grew by 2% per year. So I think it's fair to say it's something which is available today. We can accelerate the use of it. I think it will be a good bang for the buck. But most of it is economical on its own merits. We don't have a good power source for residential at this point, but I think that's 1/3 of the power consumption. Another third or 4% is a commercial, light industrial sector, and for that distributed generation is very viable. It can be reciprocating engines, it can be microturbines, it can be photovoltaics. And one of the great benefits with distributed generation, since it's generated on the site where you need it, is that you can combine the power generation with using the exhaust heat for heating, cooling, and that improves the economy even further. So in terms of distributed generation, it's available now, and I think we'll see an increased use of it.
I guess it also depends on where your house and your neighborhood is located, because in Cozumel, Mexico right now, I think distributed generation would be welcomed.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not one solution for everything and everywhere. You have to look at location. If you have cheap electricity available, the reliable grid, for God's sake, buy it and use it. In other areas, you don't have that luxury or benefits of a grid, or the grid may not be reliable, and then you have to look what fuel is available and then figure out the source to generate on site.
Gary, what about the utilization of distributed generation in the oil and gas sector?
As Aki said, there's certain applications where it makes a lot of sense. We have a field just north of Dallas that we've been looking at some type of micro turbine, because we have natural gas that produces from our crude oil wells on a daily basis. It's called casing head gas. And the quality of that gas may have some H2S or CO2 and not be really pipeline quality. It's almost a nuisance value to us. Well, if we can take that natural gas, put a micro turbine out there to fire up electricity rather than buying electricity off the grid, generate it ourselves, and pump 500 wells in the area, that makes a lot of economic sense. So it's going to depend on the location of your properties, the location of the electricity grid that you're on, and obviously the prices you're paying.
All excellent points, gentlemen. Everybody expects natural gas to contribute a greater portion of our power generation needs, yet we don't have the reserves. Are we going to run into a natural gas squeeze?
Well, Doug, we do have the reserves. The United States is one of the most rich in natural gas reserves of any country in the world. We've got the infrastructure in place, we have the pipelines, we have the manpower, and we have the ability to meet our natural gas needs. What is the compelling point here is price. Price dictates our supply of natural gas, and as prices peaked last year, we met the demand. It took about 6 months to 12 months, and you saw gas prices come screaming back down. And as prices drop below an economic limit for us to go explore and take the risk of finding new natural gas reserves, then we drop the rig count, we don't spend as much money, and natural gas prices come back up. So supply is not a problem. The United States is gas rich.
Gary, at what point do those reserves become economical? At what price?
It used to be somewhere down in the $2 range. The whole bar has been raised. Most E&P companies today here in the U.S. need $3 per MCF or per 1,000 cubic foot to be economic to go out and drill. Today we're in the $3 to $3.50 range.
Interesting. You know, in spite of a record mild winter last year in the United States and the current economy remaining in a recession, how do you explain current natural gas prices over $3 per 1,000 cubic feet?
I think it's amazed almost all executives in our business, and something that we saw coming, most analysts in our industry missed, is that we're in a natural decline of our product here in the United States. If you looked at the second quarter of 2002 into June 30, you compare it to the second quarter of 2001, natural gas supply is down about 6 to 7%, and that's after we've had pretty high rig counts last year. So we're going to have a very difficult time meeting the demand without higher prices. We've got to go drill more wells. We've got to have, instead of an 800, 900 rig count, we've got to have 12 to 1,500. And we have the ability to meet those needs, but part of the problem is the United States doesn't have sufficient natural gas storage. We're not in a situation where we can meet the critical times. A very cold winter, a hurricane comes through the Gulf and knocks off 40% of our U.S. production for 3 or 4 days. That's when we get in a problem. We have to remember that here in the U.S., every E&P company is producing every molecule of natural gas it can possibly produce. So it's not like OPEC, where somebody's over there deciding, do we produce more crude oil this month or do we take it off the market? We're flat out producing everything we can. So price is a dictating factor in our business as to how much money we will spend, when we will spend it, because economics drive our business.
Right. With the exception of California last year, we've avoided serious energy shortages. Do you predict we'll continue to stay one jump ahead? Bill?
I think so. I think we're clever and anxious, and you put those two things together and all sorts of inventing gets going. And I think people rose to the occasion in California. Certainly, part of the issue there was that once the people were informed of the issues and could address them, and once the market prices started to reflect the anxiety and the artifice, in fact, of anxiety in some cases, apparently, that people can respond. And I think we'll respond there. I think the exciting thing would be to actually use this anxiety as an opportunity not to respond with price gouging or with rapid deployment of unintended consequence machines that spit out particulates or CO2, but actually to respond strategically as a culture and say, do we really want this kind of anxiety to continue? Do we really want to rely on the present design systems that have brought us this problem? I mean, Einstein once said that no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that created it. And so I think there is a change in consciousness needed. And so I don't think it's as simple as we've seen from our political so-called leaders that we should have a de facto plan of business as usual, because I don't consider that leadership, because if we ask where that's going, it appears to be tragic. And if we're going to be led to tragedy, I don't know that that's really called leadership. I think that's called trying to do nothing and fiddle while Rome burns.
Aki, what's your position on that?
Yeah, I'm also an optimist in that respect, that I think we will be one step ahead, but will be a very tight step and not a big step ahead. There are local constraints already in the system. On the average, there is adequate supply of power, but then to bring it to where the consumption is an issue. And in Chicago, New York, there's a couple of 100 megawatts of mobile generators to support the load during the summer. So we are tight, and it doesn't take a lot to make a change. I think it's important for the future that there is a plan and the rules for the future is being set. I think that's a critical component in this equation.
Mm-hmm. Gary, comments?
I think we're maybe one quarter of a jump ahead or step ahead. I think it's a lot tighter situation than most people believe. If you look at the U.S. today, a lot of it's being masked by one of the mildest winters we've had in U.S. history, and the economy. And those things have helped make it look like our electricity needs are not as great as they are. Mm-hmm. All we have to do is turn this economy around and have any kind of abnormal events, or even just a regular cold winter, and the natural gas supply situation could become critical again. So we're on the cutting edge. And hopefully we don't have a situation like occurred in the last year and a half. I think it will be isolated areas. Other parts of the country, we're very close to being in the problems that California experienced, such as Nevada and the Midwest. So hopefully we can meet those needs without having those situations occur again.
That's interesting. Joe, what's your position on this matter?
Well, I certainly hope so. And I know our companies, the electricity companies in the U.S., are doing everything they can to maintain the reliability and provide the supply to the consumer. I mean, there's an expectation in the U.S., I have it, my family has it, when you walk into your house, you flip the light switch, you want the lights to go on. I mean, there's no question about that. And so the companies are doing their best to, in fact, provide that. I think we were really lucky in the United States, though. I mean, when we looked at the California situation, there were other states that were on the verge of having a similar situation. And because they had not increased their supply of generation, their amount of generation in their state, they were going through other types of permitting difficulties and things of that nature. We skated through on some of that by virtue of the situation or procedures and activities that were taken by the various states. We skipped through on it because we had mild winter and mild summers, and if we look to the past, that's clearly not true today. We've got this drought and this heat wave across most of the United States, and we're still providing it. But had we not had the economic downturn and we had the continued growth, I think we would have seen a much different situation. And so as we look forward to the future, we need to figure out how to fuel the economic growth needs of the country with the energy needs, both in electricity and in other forms of basic energy, in ways that we prevent those types of shortages from occurring, whether we're talking about petroleum and getting back to long gas lines, or whether we're talking about electricity with rolling brownouts or blackouts. So we need to prevent that.
Gary, energy, environment, and economy. Closing comments.
The United States has some of the most intelligent people in the world. We've got the technology, we've got the fossil fuels, and we have the desire to improve our environment. There's not another country in the world that is working as hard and as fast as the United States to improve the environment. So if we can all work together, it's going to take every form of energy supply, whether it be nuclear, whether it be fossil fuels, whether it be solar, whether it be biomass, whatever. It's going to take them all, and we've got to work together, and the best way to accomplish that is a free market system. Economics will dictate which fuel we should use. We do need the government to set standards, but those standards we need to be given enough time. We don't need to take any form of energy and give it special treatment. That's part of the problem that we've had in the past. We saw it in our industry back when the coal companies were given preferential treatment. There's a lot of talk going on in Congress about that again. We need to spread our budget around the entire industry and give everybody the opportunity to compete with one another.
Excellent point. Aki?
Gary says it very well. The thing I would like to add is, again, the importance of having a level playing field. to handle the demand and supply and do that in a very efficient way. And with that, you need a market, you need price transparency. I think the government plays a very important role in setting the standards and also driving the environmental agenda. And the best way to do it is, again, as Gary said, to have the rules known in advance. And that's when you can plan, then when you can execute to the plan. Dramatic, quick, short changes is never good for any development by definition. There's one area which is a concern of mine, and that is the fact that we import 65% of our oil. And most of that import is coming from countries which are not stable or potentially not stable. And that is the only major worry I have. Otherwise, I'm optimistic about that we can combine energy, environmental, and economy.
Excellent comments, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us. On behalf of World Energy Television, I'm Doug Johnson. I hope to see you on our next program in September. WorldEnergySource.com. View unedited versions of all interviews and discussions used to create this program. Log on to WorldEnergySource.com.
This program was brought to you in part by the Global Energy and Utilities Group of PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Stewart & Stevenson. Founded in 1902, Stewart & Stevenson is a billion-dollar company that manufactures, distributes, and provides service for a wide range of industrial and diesel-powered equipment to key industries worldwide. Stewart & Stevenson. Energy Houston. Energy Houston Magazine, an unedited forum from business and government leaders. Energy Houston Magazine.